Hello, and welcome to the Bamboo Lab podcast with your host, peak performance coach, Brian Bosley. Are you stuck on the hamster wheel of life, spinning and spinning, but not really moving forward? Are you ready to jump off and soar? Are you finally ready to sculpt your life? If so, you've landed in the right place. This podcast is created and broadcast just for you. All of you strivers, thrivers, and survivors out there. If you'd like to learn more about Brian and the Bamboo Lab, feel free to reach out to explore your true peak level at www.bamboolab3.com.
Well, welcome everyone to this week's episode of the Bamboo Lab podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Bosley. And we're not going to go through the analytics like we have been. We're in a lot of countries and states and cities now, but we're just broadcast around the world on 6 continents, and that's due to the amazing Bamboo Pack subscribers and listeners and to the inspiring guests we bring on here each and every week. I do want to read a heart letter that came from actually a friend of mine, and it was very simple, very sweet, and it was referring to the Jen Chang episode, I believe number 49, broadcast 2 weeks ago. And she said, damn, that was so good. Thank you, Tanya. I appreciate your heart letter. This episode today is dedicated to the guest we brought on last week that came, Seth Breedlove, to his mother, who is fighting valiantly and bravely against a horrendous disease. The doctors have said the medication and the treatment she was on isn't working, so she and the family are going on faith and prayers and a lot of positive vibes. So I'm going to ask you if you could all send prayers, positive vibes, and kind thoughts to Seth Breedlove's mother. She can use them. We're fighting in your corner. All right. Today we have an amazing guest on. I've been trying to get her on for a while. She was busy, and we had to reschedule once. And this was a phenomenal referral from a previous guest that was on, Sue Harrison. Came on a few months ago. We've got Janie Chang on. I'm going to read Janie's bio, and it's rather extensive, so I'm going to brief it as much as I can. Janie writes historical fictions, often with a personal connection, drawing from a family history with 36 generations of recorded genealogy. She grew up listening to stories about life in a small Chinese town in the years before the Second World War, and she has tales of ancestors who encourage her of dragons, ghosts, and immortals. Man, this is going to be good. Her first novel, 3 Souls, was a finalist for the 2014 British Columbia Book Prize's Ethel Wilson Fiction Prize. Her second novel, Dragon Springs Road, was a Globe and Mail national bestseller. Both were nominated for the International Dublin Literary Award. Her third book, The Library of Legends, released in May of 2020, was nominated for the Evergreen Award, and it is a Globe and Mail national bestseller. The Porcelain Moon is available February 21st of 2023, so that's coming up. And her next book after that, The Phoenix Crown, will be, which I think she co-authored with Kate Quinn, will be released in the fall of 2003. There's so much to learn about her, but I know that she lives in the beautiful province of British Columbia with her husband. Without further ado, Janie Chang, welcome to the Bamboo Lab podcast.
Thank you so much, Brian, for inviting me to be here. And I'm telling you, I'm so glad you had Sue Harrison on, because she is one of my writing idols.
I think she is an idol to a lot of us. Just her writings, as we've talked about in the pre-interview today, is just such a fantastic storyteller.
She is a great storyteller and a lovely, lovely person. So, where do we start?
Well, I'll start with this question. I know the Canada, the country of Canada, knows a lot about you. And one of the things Sue shared with me, and I'm seeing in the reviews, and I'm seeing in my research of you, you're now really starting to spread throughout the entire world. So with that being said, can you share with me and share with the Bamboo Pack listeners, Janie, a little bit about yourself, where you're from, a little bit about your childhood, whatever you'd like to share, just to get to know you.
Okay. Well, I was born in Taiwan, but I only lived there for about 4 years, because then my father got a job with United Nations. And we moved to the Philippines and lived there for 3 years. We moved to Iran and lived there for 3 years. We moved to Thailand and lived there for 4 years. And then my family came to Canada, and Canada is home. It's the longest I've lived anywhere. So I think I feel very, very strongly attached to it, maybe even more than people who are born here who take it for granted. But I never take for granted living in this beautiful country. And as an adult, I made the decision that I wanted to see more of the world. So I moved to New Zealand and lived and worked there for 3 years, and that's where I met my husband. And after we got married, I told him I was really getting homesick for Canada. And during our honeymoon, we'd gone skiing at Whistler, British Columbia, and he's a big-time skier. So it was a nice bit of persuasion for him to agree to move to Canada. And now, we've been here together for more than 30 years, and he loves it.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So I'm just really lucky that I was very lucky that I picked the right place for a honeymoon. And my first career actually was in computing science. I have a degree in computing science. So I've worked for high-tech companies, and it was a wonderful experience. Worked for some international corporations, so did a lot of travel. I'm still such a travel buff. And I would say that the problem with all of that is, even though the high-tech world was really interesting, and if you even have the slightest streak of being geeky, it's one of these industries where it's always interesting because there's always something new to learn. But, somewhere in the back of my mind was this young girl who wanted to be an author. And I just kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. And I think what I want to tell your listeners is, you are never too old to follow your dreams. I mean, I was 53 when my first book was published, and I was worried that I'd be too old. But, here we are 10 years later, and my fourth book is going to be published. Fourth and fifth books will be published in 2023. So, don't ever think you're too old to follow your dreams. Do something about it.
Well, I have to ask, we talked about this, Janie, in our pre-call, the story about you working with a trainer, a physical trainer, and that connecting with you becoming a writer. I just think that was the most eclectic, but yet it made sense at the same time story. Can you share that with the Bamboo Pack?
Okay, so first of all, you guys should know I'm a complete couch potato, and exercising does not come naturally or happily to me. So, like every few years, as we do, I make that New Year's resolution that I'm going to get fit. And one year, about 10 years ago, I signed up for this boot camp with this young trainer who just started out on his with his training business. It was group fitness, and it was a great exercise program because you just had to show up. The main thing was to show up, and you would just be told what to do and you follow along. But what really kept me going was that Jonathan Lerner, this wonderful guy, he would always start out every workout as you were doing, the warm-ups with a little pep talk, with a little motivational speech, with a theme for the week of what we should focus on. And one day, there we are doing our jumping jacks, and I'm feeling sort of vaguely dissatisfied with my life and, the things, the dreams that I have yet to fulfill. And Jonathan is saying, there are people who say they'd like to be fit. They say they want to be fit. But I'm saying to you, are you committed to being fit? Are you doing the things? Are you taking the steps towards, a lifetime of fitness? And there I am with my arms and legs doing the jumping jacks. And I'm thinking, I'd like to be an author. I really want to be an author, but what am I doing about it? Am I really committed enough to do something about it? And a few weeks later, someone told me about a creative writing class at one of the universities in the evenings, and I signed up for that. And when I signed up for that, it told me exactly how little I knew about putting together a novel, like a book-length piece of writing. And, I mean, I've written little pieces here and there for myself and for my family. So then I signed up for a one-year creative writing program at the Simon Fraser University. The program is called the Writer's Studio. And for that, you have to actually submit some work to apply for it. They only allow 24 students in every year. But it all began with doing those jumping jacks and listening to Jonathan saying, but are you committed to being fit? And I'm there doing my jumping jacks thinking, am I committed to being an author?
I just think that it's so interesting that they have nothing to do with each other. I think if I can just validate for a minute what Janie just said to the Bamboo Pack listener out there, a few things she said already in the first 10 minutes that are incredible lessons. Number one is you're never, ever too old to follow your dreams. And I think so many people think that, oh, my ship has sailed. The stars are already gone past. I don't have the time. I don't have the strength, the energy to do this anymore. That's all baloney. She published her first book at 53 years old. And I want you to think about this. The Toronto Star said that Janie is one of the most original voices in Canadian historical fiction. That's a pretty big quote, pretty big review from a pretty big source in a vast land of people in Canada. So she started at 53, and this is where she is now. And who knows where she's going from this point forward. I mean, that's a golden piece of wisdom. But I think the other thing is just looking at what Jonathan did. And for what Janie did, she had this personal trainer, jumping jacks, motivating, yelling, they're sweating and jumping, all these things, running. And she took wisdom from that person. And we never know where bites and bits of wisdom are going to come. But most of us tend to shut our minds off of, unless it's a experienced teacher or someone we respect a great deal or some reliable source. Wisdom comes from just about any person you can meet. If you haven't learned that yet by listening to the Bamboo Lab podcast, that everybody has wisdom to share, then you're probably not going to learn much from this point forward. Janie found wisdom from this one person who is in a completely different industry, a completely different stage of life. And I think for looking back at what Jonathan did, we all have the opportunity to inspire people around us on a consistent basis. I hope he knows that those words he said, are you motivated to be in shape? Are you motivated to be off the couch? I hope he knows that Janie Chang, a person like this, took that and asked herself, am I motivated enough to be a writer? And answered the question, yes, and then has gone out and published several books now, amazing books. So I just wanted to say that, Janie. I wanted to capture those gold nuggets that you dropped over there so the Bamboo Pack member out there can really pick that up. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And I did tell Jonathan about that when my first book was published. He was kind of astonished because, as you say, exercise and writing a book don't seem to be connected at all. But it's all part of life, right?
Yeah. It is. And, when a high tide raises all ships. And when I always tell myself and my clients and my loved ones, you get better at one thing that's important in your life, that tends to make you better at a lot of other things in life. Exercise is a good example. That tends to bring us up in a lot of areas when we take care of ourselves physically. And I think it's fantastic. I think a lot of listeners out there will like this, Janie, when we're talking to a very acclaimed, successful writer on the podcast today. But yet, so many people tend to think that people who are successful or acclaimed or famous, that they're good at everything. But you are a self-proclaimed couch potato, and exercise does not come easy to you. So we all have our strengths and we all have our weaknesses. No matter how successful, no matter how famous or acclaimed we are, we all have our cracks in our armor. We all have our kryptonite that we deal with.
Well, and you can't do it all, because I have to confess to you that the bad part of this is once I really started doing the writing, I could not keep up with the exercise program. So for like 10 years would be, I'd be writing like mad for like 18 months, and then I'd show up at Jonathan's studio again saying, I'm between books, I'm back to get fit.
That is called monomaniacal focus, I think.
And the thing is, I stopped beating myself up for not being able to do it all. Something had to give, and I wish it wasn't the exercise, but it did. But the other thing is when you talk about being committed to being an author, one of the things that was actually really difficult was making the switch from being in high tech to being a writer, because, I just said to you that I couldn't keep up with the exercise. The other thing was, the work that I was doing was extremely demanding, but it paid a lot. Like high tech pays really well, and it's hard to walk away from that money. I didn't walk away from that money as in totally walk away, but I put myself into a situation where I could just work part-time and not have as much stress, because that's a whole other story, stress in a full-time corporate position. But I made sure that I carved out enough time to write. And this happened after my first book was published, and my editor accepted my proposal for my second book. So I was on a contract to turn out a second book, and there were deadlines, and I was really panicking. So, I think that's where you have to make that commitment to say, here's something that I really, really want. I discussed it with my husband. We agreed that fulfilling this dream of being a published author mattered more to my life goals and happiness than to be in a corporate job earning a lot of money, but actually not feeling very happy.
So it sounds like you had a great deal of support from your husband throughout this process so far.
I think it's critical when you're going to be making a big life change, right? It's never just about you. It affects your family. It affects your income. It could affect your income. It could, excuse me. Yeah. And that's why you see so many books when you read the author's acknowledgments. It's like, I would like to thank my husband. I would like to thank my wife. I would like to thank my poor suffering family who had to eat mac and cheese for 6 months,
Maybe people have to say, I'm going to dedicate my first book to you. So maybe that helps people to stay off your back a little bit too. And it makes me wonder how people do it with very little support from family, because I do know a lot of people who have started endeavors, maybe not necessarily writing a book, but started a business, chased a dream, and at first they didn't have a lot of support from family. And that takes a special kind of person. It takes a special kind of person to chase your dreams no matter what. But it just seems as if there's an extra weight on your back when your family doesn't support you through the process. And that would be an interesting study to see what they do differently when they don't have the appropriate support that many of us are blessed to have.
I think that must be so stressful. I could not imagine being that strong. But my first guess would be they don't need a lot of sleep. So that, they're trying to do these things during hours when it doesn't affect their family, doing their best not to, like working really hard and doing their best not to have what they put into their dreams impact their families noticeably. And I applaud people who are able to do that.
Yeah, I think that's probably it. They don't need a lot of sleep, or maybe some people are just, I think for myself, I was 29 when I went out on my own and started my coaching firm. And I think I was just too naive and inexperienced to realize that it was going to impact a lot of people. Maybe there's a lot of self-interest and a lot of selfishness in my act back then, but thankfully it paid off. But, I know this morning, Sue, and after 26 years of coaching, or Sue, I'm sorry, Janie, I woke up this morning after my 26 years and 1 month of doing this. And I woke up and got out of bed at 3:45 this morning. So, and I don't think I could have done that at 29 when I was starting off, but there's some mornings I just can't sleep. And I think, I know my creative time, my magical time is early in the morning for me, when I feel strongest, most creative, most productive. And so I just got out of bed this morning and started working, and I felt so great. I won't feel great this afternoon, I'm sure, but.
Well, and the thing is, this is like the happiest time of my life, of my adult life. It really is. The cliche is you're living the dream, and I really feel as though I am. Okay, I mean, the state of the world is terrible, but if I just focus on my own little bubble here, I've got a book coming out. I'm co-authoring a book with a friend of mine who's wonderful. Her name is Kate Quinn, and she's a New York Times bestseller. And that book, we just heard, will be released in September of 2023. And then in the middle of, in June, I need to start working on another book that I have under contract, which I need to hand in 2024. So I don't know when the release date is. And at the very beginning, when I was doing those jumping jacks, all I was thinking was, please, God, just one book, just one published book.
Sometimes you have to be careful of what you wish for. Well, we're really glad your wish was and your prayers were granted. That's for sure. Janie?
I do not take any of this for granted.
No.
I mean, there's hard work and there's luck and there's the people who help you along the way. You do not take it for granted.
So what you just said right there was hard work, luck, and support. I mean, I think that's a very, very crucial combination right there. Is you have to put the hard work in. And I was reading a quote today. I was reading a book called The Everyday Hero Manifesto by Robin Sharma this morning. And he said, you don't wish for luck, you go make luck. You go out there and work hard and hopefully luck will find you. I like that statement. But I think what you just said right there, hard work, luck, and support are incredibly important ingredients for any successful endeavor. Janie, I have a question for you. In the last couple of years, you just mentioned our world is in an upheaval in so many ways. In the last 2 or 3 years, we've gone through a lot of changes due to COVID and quarantines and the pandemic. And of course, through that, we've had a lot of political upheaval, economic upheaval. We've seen a lot of people go through mental and emotional challenges. What have you seen to be your greatest learning during that time?
Gosh, I would say that it's the people who make a difference. It's your friends and family who get you through it. In writing, and I have so many good friends now who are also authors, and we're able to share what is troubling us. We're able to share how the state of the world is affecting us. I know that a lot of people might follow authors or celebrities on social media, and I am telling you, that's the sort of upbeat, bright persona that we put on. And in public, that's in public. And in private, I have author friends whose children are really suffer during the lockdown. Author friends whose elderly parents were in care during COVID, and they themselves might suffer through depression because, creative types can be a little bit more sensitive to disasters going on around the world. And it's your friends who keep you floating. It really is. And that's the one thing that I've learned. It's the human relationships that matter more than your job, more than the things you buy. It's those human connections.
That's so important. I think that's so beautiful that you said that. we've talked a lot here in the past, either on some of my monologue podcasts or with my guests, about the importance of having a tight circle, people who will circle the wagons around you, people who will celebrate with you, who will support you, and who will challenge you to grow, and how that is such a necessary ingredient in every day of life, but especially during challenging times like we've gone through over the past 3 years. Janie, I've got a question. I ask every guest this question, and you can always say pass or not, but if you would answer, that would be fantastic. What would you say it would be, from your perspective, at this stage in your journey, is the most difficult thing you have ever gone through, and how did you overcome it?
Do you mean in my professional journey or just life in general?
Life in general, or whatever you'd like to share.
Hands down, it would be watching my mother decline into dementia, because it wasn't just painful watching it happen. It was that it happened over 10 years. So, I moved her into a house that was literally across the street from us. I tried to get her, in-home care, to help her out when I was still working, try to see her as often as I could, and finally had to move her into a facility with full-time care. And I just remember the day I went to see her and she didn't recognize me anymore. I went home and I cried and I cried.
I can well imagine.
And anyway, she passed away in 2019. And if there's one thing I was glad about, was that this happened, that she passed away before COVID, because, it was so horrible in all the seniors' homes when COVID came around. But that was the hardest thing.
I can't imagine any other tragedy competing with that. And now I see why you and Sue Harrison are such kindred spirits, and what brought you, what really connected the two of you so well together.
Yeah, we did, we shared some emails and insights on how we were both dealing with elder care. It's just, it's terrible to see someone who was your parent, who was the one who protected you and looked after you, to watch them diminish, and to watch it go on for so many years. And, every couple of weeks, something would change in my mother's condition, and I would have to find a way to accommodate it, or have the care staff, in the facility, remind them to try and accommodate for it. So anyway, yeah, I think that is something that's common to a lot of people, though. It's not just me. It's something we're all facing.
I agree. It's definitely a communal disease. We faced it not in my immediate family so much yet, but an uncle of mine passed away from it. And a couple of aunts on both sides of the family, but a really good friend of mine when I lived in Grand Rapids, Michigan, my neighbor of many, many years, he was an elderly gentleman named Pat, who came over to my house every single day, and he would say to me, "Brian, now what are you doing?" when I was working on a project, and he would irritate me, and he would tease me and pick on me. And I remember one day just seeing some changes in him. And I asked his wife, Maureen, I said, "There's something different about Pat." And then over the course of the next year, everybody started noticing it. And then eventually he did pass after about 2.5 years fighting, 3 years of fighting. And I had the great honor of speaking at his funeral, and shared some wonderful stories of how he impacted so many lives. But it was such an awful journey for everybody to watch him decline. And I can't even imagine what it's like to be trapped in that heart and that head when that's happening to to the individual, him or herself. So now, I'm not going to guess your age, but I think I figured it out when you said when your first book was published and how old you were then. But at this stage in your journey, we'll call it, Janie, what do you consider a win in your life? What is a victory or a triumph for you?
Oh, I'm kind of this pessimistic person. And I try really, really hard to take the wins. I mean, just taking the win and taking the compliment and not saying yes, but. For me, that's like a personal improvement. Does that sound really weird?
No.
Because every time something happens, it's like you set the bar higher for yourself. It's like you're never satisfied with what you've done. And I have this terrible tendency to do it. It's sort of like, okay, I wrote this one book. Now I need to write the second one. And oh my goodness, my third one really sucked, I think, compared to my second one. And this is all the insecure stuff going on in your head. Instead of just reading a review that says, I really enjoyed this book, and not thinking, yes, but did you notice the part where, such and such? Or I made the Globe and Mail bestseller list, and I'm still saying, but it's not the New York Times. Well, good grief. How many people get on the New York Times, right?
Right.
And how many people even manage to get published? Why do we do this to ourselves? So to me, a win is something good happens, and I don't second guess it. I don't say, yes, but you could do better. Just accept it, right?
Just accept it. And I think that's so powerful. Even when the Toronto Star says you are one of the most refreshing voices or original voices in Canadian historical fiction. I mean, to me, that's a pretty good win. That's a pretty good win.
Yeah, but again, it's the Toronto Star, but I really like it if the Globe and Mail says that.
Well,
I really like it if it was USA Today. And it's like, stop it, Janie. Slap.
Right. We all have those insecurities. So I'm going to stop for a minute. I just randomly pulled up Amazon. I pulled up your first book. I think it was your first one here, Three Souls. And I got the second or third quote by Nathan C. This was written September 14th, 2020. It has been a few months since reading this book, and I'm still thinking about it. The sense of immersion I felt through the story was so compelling that I keep coming back to the characters and their arcs over and over again. If you appreciate a story that takes its time to really plant you in the environment, gives you enough culture content to fully understand character motivations and a fresh view of life after death, this book is for you. That's a win right there. One person that you touched them months after they read it. I think that's a darn good win. And no buts, Janie, no buts.
No buts.
No buts.
No buts.
Okay, we're going to go back right now, Janie. You and I are going to go back in time, and we're going to pull up a time machine. We're going to fly back to, let's just say you were 25 years old. You're a young girl, really starting out on your journey in life. A lot of stuff ahead of you, a lot of travel, husband, you've got then this exercise class that Jonathan, you get to experience that all of a sudden turns you in this direction to motivate you to be a writer. But if you could go back to that young girl in her early 20s and you could sit down and talk to her, what would you say? What would you say to her? What would you say would be some advice or rules of success or life you would give to her?
I would say that people matter more than the jobs. I think we get in your 20s, well, definitely my generation, in our 20s, I think we were really, I won't say manipulated, but we were raised to expect that you put everything into the work and you toe the corporate line. And when I was in my 20s, I was putting in, 60-hour weeks because I wanted to be good at my job. And I really wish I put that time being more thoughtful, being kinder, being a better friend to the people who were being understanding of me, who were saying, I think you're working too hard, and I would just blow them off. And I really regret not having matured faster to understand that and to do something about it. There are some friendships that I regret losing as a result of those years,
And was it because of the fast pace of your lifestyle at that time with being in the industry you were in? And was that really what caused it, the extra hours you were working and the drive you had towards your career?
Yeah, I can be kind of obsessive. So even now, if I'm on a roll, if I'm writing, I'll be up till 3 a.m. I could be researching something because in historical fiction, you do a lot of research. And I will dig down that rabbit hole forever until I come up with, the information I need, or maybe never find it. But, I think that I neglected my friends. I didn't take the time to be as kind, as considerate as I could have been. And those are the things that I regret now. I don't think about, well, who was it that said no man on his deathbed ever wished he'd spent more time with his business?
Yeah, I just read that again recently somewhere, and I'm not sure who actually said that, but I that comes up a lot in my readings.
Yeah, and the corporate world did nothing for me. It's just a business transaction. I still have some health issues that have to do with stress, that are stress related. And there's health conditions that were brought on by stress. And that was one of the reasons I started backing away from the corporate world. Is if you know that you've got that sort of obsessive personality where you can't say no, where you work really hard. I got terrific job reviews. I did really well in high tech, met some wonderful people, some of whom are still really, really good friends. But it was those personal friendships that lasted way after the job went away, way after I left. And they still endure.
I think, I really, sometimes we take the term obsessive or obsessed with something in a negative way. And I think there is obviously an incredibly negative component to obsession if the obsession is on something, maybe a person or something that's something that's destructive. But I think so many of the world changers that I've studied or worked with or had the pleasure of meeting have a really unique obsession toward really when it comes down to, when you break it down to its core elements, it really comes down to improving the world. And they just use a different tool or different skill set or skill set, I guess, or talent to make that happen, whether it's through business or writing, some through sports, through art, through whatever, venue they're using. But I think obsession can turn from a very powerful tool to a very destructive tool if we don't really keep it at bay to some degree. We have to keep an eye on it.
You're right. You're absolutely right. And, one of the things I used to think about was my father, who worked for the United Nations. He was a scientist, and he worked on programs that helped underdeveloped nations grow food better, helping countries feed themselves better. And I would think, what have I done except help Fortune 500 companies sell more hardware and software? How has that bettered the world?
Well, I would have to say the people who are using that software and hardware are out there changing the world to some degree, using the tools that you created. Because, I think we all play our part in the circle somewhere. And I know when I was in finance, right, Janie, I had a difficult time in finance because I saw finance at the time as me trying to make money. And in reality, it wasn't until I got out of finance 26 years ago that I realized that is not what finance is. Finance is about creating wealth for families and individuals who therefore support their families, who can educate future generations, who can change the world, who can give philanthropically to other people, who can start endowments and can donate to charitable causes and things like that. And, sometimes we forget that the ultimate benefit of our work isn't exactly what we created. It's what the end user does with what we created that makes such a difference in the world. It's sometimes very hard to see that, for a lot of people. And it can be demotivating and disengaging for us sometimes when we can't see that. And I know it took me several years to figure that out. And I think what you've done since the day you started in the working world has been changing the world. I think now it's just more obvious because now you can see people like, I think it was Chuck C. or whoever it was that I just read the quotes that people, how your written word has changed their lives. I mean, it's better when you can see the actual end user and how they're using it and being affected by it. So I think you and I are just very fortunate in that position right now in our careers. I'd like to take a minute. Oh, I'm sorry. Pardon me. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I'm just saying, I guess, first of all, you are right. And second of all, the difference now is that there's fewer layers between us and the person who is benefiting from our work. So
perfectly stated.
Yeah, it's easier to see if it just gave this person a few hours of pleasure, of escape, maybe a different way of looking at the world because of a book that he's read. It's all good.
And Janie, don't you think with the words that you write, a lot of times I get to some clients because a lot of my clients are in the professional world. They're very high achievers. And when I say to them, we talk about books. Oh, I only read nonfiction. Because I want to learn how to be a better leader or a better producer, be more creative. And I always share with them, I say, if you want to be a better people person, read fiction, good fiction, historical fiction. Because when you do that, you start to empathize with characters and you start to realize that you get into the heads of a fictional, not make-believe character, and you start seeing that no one person is all good or no one person is all evil. That you get to see what people, you don't get to see in the heads of the people around you, but when you read a fictional book, I like historical fiction, you get to really watch a person's character evolve. You get to see the things that they do, and you can relate to that and empathize with that, and you can learn from their mistakes, and you can be inspired by their growth. And I think there's so much personal and professional growth to be had by reading fictional books.
I love the way you said that, Brian. And with fiction, you can live so many different lives with every book that you open. And you can say to yourself, that's how I would respond to that situation. Or, I would do that differently if it were me. And I think the particular privilege that we have when we write historical fiction is that we can bring up difficult issues, but sort of soften it through the lens of time. And hopefully, if we've done a good job, when the reader closes the book, they'll say, man, that was a really tough situation. That was a very difficult era for that woman to have lived in, and then sit back and say, but wait, it's still going on in our world. No.
That is so perfectly stated. I couldn't agree more. I've never thought of it that way. I've never thought of that advantage or benefit of reading a fictional story. When people ask me what are the three most impactful books of my life, I have a lot of them. And some are nonfiction, some are fiction, but 3 of the top 10 for sure are fiction. The first one is Jonathan Livingston Seagull by Richard Bach. The character in there is that book, that book taught me that you don't settle for picking at scraps on a fishing boat as a seagull. You fly and you soar and you try to break records that nobody's ever broken, and you give it your best every day. Another one is The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. And her lead character, Howard Rourke, taught me to be able to stand on an issue. Even if other people disagree, you can stand alone and still be right. Truth is not a numbers game. You can be alone and stand alone on something you believe in, whether the world is fighting against you or not. And another one is simply called A Boy's Life by Robert McCammon. And it's a coming-of-age story of a young boy in a southern town, and he fights monsters, and it's just the boy's imagination and having the adventure of a young child and keeping that spirit of adventure in your life for your throughout your entire journey. Those are 3 books that had a major impact on me, and they're nothing to do with personal growth or professional growth, but yet they have everything to do with personal growth and professional growth.
It is, A Boy's Life is a friend of mine who reads a lot says it is for her the best coming of age story ever written. And can I tell you my Robert McCammon story?
No, please.
I've
Yes.
actually met him, and he was part of my journey to success.
Really?
So when I was still writing, in my creative writing class, that 1-year program, There was a writers' conference. It's called Surrey International Writers' Conference, and they invite, authors and agents and publishers from, all over the world. And it's a real roll up your sleeves and, get into workshops and learn about the craft of writing. It's a real, working conference. And for the price of admission, you also get 15 minutes with a published author who would read 7 pages of your book that you're working on. And you also get 10 minutes with an agent, so you could pitch to the agent. And if the agent thought that your book was of interest, they would say, get in touch with me later. So at this conference, I pitched my first book, 3 Souls, to the agent of my dreams, because she belonged to the agency that represented Amy Tan and Lisa C. and Maxine Hong Kingston, those powerhouse female Chinese-American authors. So she belonged to that agency. And I pitched to her, and she was very nice, and she gave me her card and said, well, when you finished writing your book, please just, email me and let me know and send me some pages. And for the author who was going to read the first 7 or 8 pages of my book and give me some feedback, I got Robert McCammon. So he's a lovely guy, reads my first few pages, and he says, this is really good. He goes, this is eminently publishable. Have you shown this to an agent? And I said, blah, blah, blah. Well, I pitched to this woman, and, I think she's okay with it, but the idea and everything. And she gave me her card. He goes, no. But has she read these pages? And I said, no. And then, the 5 o'clock bell rang, the end of the it was the end of the conference for that day. And Robert McCammon and I get up from the table and we head out to the lobby. And then I said to him, Robert, do you see that woman over there, standing, by the window? I said, if you really want to help me, that is the agent of my dreams. And he says, right. And he pulls out his wallet, gets out a business card, and he heads over to the agent. And at this point, I think I'm going to throw up behind the curtains or something, because he's doing this. And Robert chats with her, and, he goes off to the elevators, probably up to his room, and she comes walking towards me because, he's pointed in my direction. And she says, Robert McCammon tells me you have pages, you have chapters with you. I'm going, yes, I got the first 2 chapters of my book. And she said, well, I never do this, but it is so rare for an established author to go to bat for someone unknown. So I'll take your chapters.
Wow.
And she became my agent. Long story short, several months later, I finished writing my novel, and she signed me up. And this is out because Robert McCammon, who had no reason on earth to help me out.
Number one, he's got, I don't know how many millions of books published, or probably books sold, and how many New York Times bestsellers. Gone South, I remember that. Another one about a nightbird, Speak the Nightbird or something. I've read 3 or 4 or 5 of his books throughout the course of my life. Boy's Life, I continue to go back to, and every time I see it at a used bookstore or at a garage sale, I always buy another copy. And I like to read it every couple of years. Just to think about the 2 big impetuses to your career were both people you really didn't know. Jonathan, your physical trainer, Robert McCammon, who just happened to be the person, the published author who was going to read your chapter. That comes right back to those 3 things you said: hard work, luck, and support. without those two, I wonder where Janie Chang would be today without those two pivotal moments. It could have been, it might not have been Robert, it might not have been Jonathan, but without having two people who kind of helped you tweak your life, we all have that. We just sometimes overlook it. We don't ask, or when somebody says something, we don't pick up on the advice, or we don't ask for the help. But we all have people around us who can pivot our lives in a completely better direction if we just keep our eyes and ears open, and we ask for help, and we look for little strains of wisdom. And you did that, and look at where it took you. That's so cool. Yeah, it's so cool. It's going to make me want to pick up Boy's Life. I'm sorry?
And obviously he was not the only person who helped me along the way, but he was a big contributing factor,
Yeah, we all have these pivotal moments. There are probably dozens and dozens of different people, but sometimes we're just not aware that they're there, or we don't aware that they're nudging us, or we're not aware that they could be a nudge for us. And vice versa. We can be a nudge for someone else in the world that might need a little nudge or a little help, a little confidence, a little optimism, a little help, a little support. There's so many opportunities for human beings to do this for each other. And I think this is just a good example. These are just two of your many examples of how that changed your path. And obviously there were many more people that did that for you as well. Now, I know you've got two more books coming out. You've got in 2023, you've got a book coming out in February, which is The Porcelain Moon. And you got, of course, the book that you co-authored with Kate Quinn, which is The Phoenix Crown, which is coming out in the fall of next year. And then next year, you're starting on another novel. If I ask the question, what's next for you, Janie, would that be it? That next novel that you start next year?
It would be. I can't think that far ahead anymore. Brian, don't ask me these things because I'm exhausted already. Because, in February, the readers, just in case they don't know anything about the whole cycle of publishing, but basically because I have a book coming out in February. For the month before, during, and after, it's going to be super busy because the marketing and publicity people will be saying, I want you to write a contributed article for, I don't know, Time Magazine. I've written one for Time Magazine for my previous book. I need you to be on this podcast. So some of them, they line up for me, and some, I seek out on my own, or, you're going to do this little book tour up and down the west coast of Canada. And it just gets really, really busy. So at the same time, January, February, March, Kate and our editor has said to us, you need to do your editing in January and February if we're to make that September publication date. So I'll still be going crazy, doing the final edits over the first 2 months of the year. And then that book, my book and Kate's, will come out in September of next year. But during that time, starting in June, I need to work on writing my next book, which is called The Fourth Princess, which is a Gothic novel set in Shanghai. I need to work on that too at the same time that the launch things for Phoenix Crown in September is happening, the month before, during, and after. So, Brian, do not ask me what's next because I'm already paralyzed.
Okay. I'll just ask you, we'll stick with the "what are you doing tomorrow" question from now on when I talk to you. we'll keep it short-sighted for now. I know Sue Harrison's got her next book. I think it's The Midwife's Touch, coming out in February, and I'm going to get her back on the podcast just before that so we can promote it. So I'll make sure that in this, for you Bamboo Pack listeners out there will be a link to Janie's website on here. Please get in there. Order her books. Start with her first book and go through these. I know I'll be going through them, and they just look great. I have to be honest, I haven't read them yet. But just, I love that those period pieces, historical fiction. They sound like deep character development, great plot development that you get immersed. If that's what you're looking for, Janie's your author. And then keep following. So, because in February of next year, then again in September of year, 2 more books are coming out, and then another one in 2024. So let's get on this Janie Chang bandwagon and really start supporting her and reading her novels, because I think they're going to change our lives. Janie,
I'm going to put in a plug for Sue Harrison's book because she sent me an early copy of The Midna Weiss Touch, and it is excellent. She's just an excellent storyteller, and you just get sucked right into the world of the novel.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like too. And it just the reviews, not the reviews, but the summary of it I've read so far, it seems like it's something different from what I've read from Sue in the past, obviously from her Storyteller trilogy and the other trilogy. I always forget the other one. The Stonecarver trilogy. Those 2 trilogies obviously were taking place, 9 to 10,000 years ago in the Aleutian Peninsula. This seems like a branch off from anything I've read, so I'm really excited to read this one when it comes out.
Fabulous.
So my final question before we start wrapping up, Janie, is, are there any questions that I didn't ask that I should have asked, or is there any final message you want to leave with the Bamboo Pack audience?
I think I just want to add on one more bit about fulfilling your dreams, which is, I told you about doing jumping jacks, right? Mm-hmm. But, and I also told you about, I also told you about, having to watch my mom decline. But one of the things that happened was I would go see my mom at the care home, and I would look around me and think to myself, how many of these people managed to fulfill their dreams? Mm. How many of these people are sitting there now regretting not having done enough? So I guess that's kind of a negative kick in the rear end, but it was a kick in the rear end for me, because it made me think about, where I am now. I'm in, middle age. When am I going to get moving on becoming an author? And so it's never too late. You just do not want to be in your rocking chair when you're 95 thinking, I wish I'd done more.
Mm. I'm trying to write this down, Janie. I'll come back and re-listen to that so I can write that quote down again. I think that's so powerful because, again, we all have time. All of us have more time. So you don't want to be in your rocking chair at 90 and wishing you had done more. That's a perfect way to end this interview in this conversation. And we're going to come back to you in just a minute, Janie, but I just want to recapture some of the wisdom you shared for the Bamboo Pack member out there. Because some of them are driving and they may not have a chance to write this down, but this will stick in their gullet a little bit more. And when you get home, please, Bamboo Pack member, if you're not sitting down right now taking notes, go through this Janie's conversation again, listen to the wisdom she shared and write these down. These are game changers and life changers. And I'm not going to recap some of the stuff that I already recapped, but one of the things she really said was going back in time, talking to her younger version of herself, the things of advice she would have shared. People matter more than the jobs. Be kinder. Be a better friend. Don't neglect the good relationships. She said she has some regret, from those days of working hard and putting everything else in front of her career and her just constant. And there's nothing wrong with having a obsession towards your career and a great work ethic and drive. But remember, the idea is not just to be a great worker. The idea is to succeed in life. Your job is a tool to get you there. The people around you are part of that journey. If you have good quality, solid people around you, they're not going to deter from your success. They're going to add to your success. So if we're driving so hard in life and that we're losing good people, it's going to have a negative impact on the success of our journey in the long run. And that's not what we're after. And that goes back to what she said, 3 crucial elements. It takes hard work. It takes some luck, and it takes people around us. It takes the support of people around us. So, surround yourself with good quality people. Smother them with love. Celebrate with them. Support them. Challenge them to grow, and allow them to do that to you as well. And one of the things that really caught me was I asked Sue, Janie, I keep calling you Sue. You remind me so much of my conversation with Sue, which is a compliment to both of you. When I asked Janie, what is the most difficult thing you went through? And she talked about watching her mother deteriorate from dementia over the course of a long time, 10 years, to the point where she passed in 2019 and didn't remember who Janie was. Now, that's a very dark moment. And so in Janie's life, she said, obviously the most difficult thing she's gone through. So for anybody out there going through a very difficult thing right now, and many of you are, and I know that, maybe not to that degree, but it's big to you. And you may feel like there's no hope. You may feel like there's no light at the end of the tunnel, and you may feel that you're different than everybody else who's gone through difficult things. You're not going to survive this, or you don't know how you can. I want you to fast forward 3 years later. This is Janie's life. Don't compare yourself to Janie's life, but lay it side by side and let them go parallel. Then she said today, in December of 2022, 3 years after her mother's passing, a very dark period in her life, she said, "This is the happiest part of my adult life." So you can go from those dark moments, those very disastrous times that you don't know how you're going to get through it. And if you do the right things, take the right steps, continue to focus on yourself, your growth, and surround yourself with good people around you, work hard, expect a little luck to come in there, you'll get to the point where you'll be able to say, this is the happiest moment of my adult life. The old haunts never fully leave us. The people who pass never really leave our hearts and minds. But we can get to a point, and we all can, no matter what we're going through, to make this the happiest moment in our lives. No matter what you're going through today, that light is out there. And that's probably the best way I can wrap this up, Janie. I can't thank you enough. I know we have a hard stop here in a few minutes, but if I can get just a couple of minutes with you off air, so we can talk for 3 or 4 minutes, I'd like that, if that's okay with you. And in the meantime, I just want to thank you, Janie Chang, for being such an amazing and actually an incredibly inspiring guest on the Bamboo Lab podcast.
Thank you so much, Brian, for inviting me to be on your podcast. And thanks to all your listeners out there who are listening to you because they want to do more with their lives.
Oh, it was a pleasure and an honor. Well, Bamboo Pack members out there, we'll be back in a few days. Just in the meantime, we're going to miss you. But in the meantime, please get out there and sculpt your life. Every day, strive for your best. Every day, show love and respect to yourself and others. And every day, live intentionally and consciously. I appreciate you all.